Okay, so we talked about multiplying fractions yesterday, and if you'll remember, we had a little bit of a rhyme. Today, we're going to talk about dividing fractions. And dividing fractions is going to follow the same pattern that we used with multiplying fractions. So the dividing fractions notes are actually going to lead you back into the multiplying fractions notes, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So the first thing we're going to do is write our rhyme for dividing fractions. So it says to divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. So let's talk about that for just a second. So basically, yesterday when we did multiplying fractions, we really focused on this word fraction. So notice it says to divide fractions as well on this one. So not mixed numbers. So every time that we do a division problem with fractions, we have to make sure we have fractions and that they're not in mixed number form. It does say don't ask why, and that's kind of silly. There are absolutely mathematical reasons why we flip that second fraction, and we're gonna maybe show you some of those arrays in class and things like that. But basically all you have to know is that you flip the second, and then every division problem, once you've done that, becomes a multiplication problem. So if you remember from yesterday that rhyme, then that's gonna help you when you're dividing fractions. So let's look at our notes from yesterday. So yesterday it said to multiply fractions, you know you've got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. So every division problem, once you flip the second fraction, is going to follow that same pattern as yesterday. So let's just start with our first example. Our first example is 3/4 divided by 1/2. 3/4 divided by 1/2. So let's talk about what that looks like in terms of this rhyme. To divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second. That means the second fraction. So we're gonna flip the second fraction, and then it's gonna become a multiplication problem. So this is still 3/4. We flip the second fraction, so instead of 1/2, it's gonna become 2/1. And then it says, and multiply. So instead of division, it's going to be then a multiplication problem. When we flip this second fraction, basically what we're doing is finding the reciprocal, okay? So the reciprocal just means I'm taking this fraction and I'm inverting it. So I'm gonna just put that word here, reciprocal. Okay, so it's the reciprocal of this fraction. Okay, that's gonna come into play for sure when you get to 8th grade. It's just a good vocabulary term to be aware of, right? So then it becomes a multiplication problem. So then it's the same rhyme as yesterday. To multiply fractions, you know you've got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. So top times top, 3 times 2 would be 6. Bottom times bottom, 4 times 1 would be 4. We have 2 different options here. We could go ahead and do top in, bottom out to change this back to a mixed number, or we could go ahead and simplify this. I know that I can divide 6 and 4 both by 2, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I simplified this fraction. Here's the deal though, it's still improper, which means the top, the numerator, is larger than the denominator. So it's still not quite in its lowest to simplest terms. So I am gonna have to do some division. You can definitely see that in your head, but I want you to see the process for sure. So top in, bottom out. I'm looking for how many times 2 goes into 3. We know it goes in 1 whole time with 1 left over. Okay, so if I'm taking this and I'm writing it back into mixed number form, It went in one whole time with one left over out of 2. Okay? So 3/4 divided by 1/2 would be 1 1/2. Okay? Basically what this question is asking is how many halves are there in 3/4, right? How many halves are in 3/4? Well, there's one whole half plus a half of another one, okay? And we're gonna see a lot of pictures maybe to see what this actually looks like, but right now we're working with just the algorithm, okay? All right, so the next question we're gonna do is 3 1/2 divided by 4/5. 3 1/2 divided by 4/5. Yesterday we did 3 1/2 times 4/5. Today we're gonna do 3 1/2 divided by 4/5. So one of the things we talked about yesterday is that we absolutely have to make sure we have fractions. We don't have just fractions. So this right here, we have to make sure to do popcorn. Talked about that yesterday. We've got to change it into an improper fraction. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So remember, this is still 7 halves, right? And then our division of fractions rhyme says flip the second fraction. Notice this one did not flip, just like up here in this example, 3/4 did not flip. This second fraction is going to flip. So instead of 4/5, it's going to be 5/4. So flip the second and multiply. So it becomes a multiplication problem. Then again, we go back to our multiplication of fractions rhyme to multiply fractions. You know, you've got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. Sometimes my kiddos in class, we would say them in silly accents, and so we might say them in like a British accent, top times top and bottom times bottom. And then we would remember it for the rest of the school year. So let's do top times top. 7 times 5 is 35. Bottom times bottom, 2 times 4 is 8, okay? So again, we have an improper fraction, just like we would do any other time that we have an improper fraction. 35 and 8, they don't have any common factors like I had up here, right? 6 and 4 had a common factor, so I could go ahead and do some simplifying there. 35 and 8 don't have any of those, so I'm gonna just do some division. 35 divided by 8. 8 goes into 35 4 times. 4 times 8 is 32, and there's 3 left over, okay? A lot of this work is coming from knowing our multiplication facts, right? If I know my multiplication facts, it's gonna be a lot easier to do some of this division and simplifying. So let's rewrite this as a mixed number. So it went in 4 whole times. 3 was how many were left over, that's our remainder, out of 8. 3 and 8 don't have any common factors, so that means that I am done with this particular question. Okay? All right, let's go to our next example. Let's see what this looks like here. Awesome. All right. So our next example is going to be a little bit different. We want to make sure that in your notes that you have one example of each type of problem that you might see. So we're going to start with 1 7/8 divided by 5. Okay? 1 7/8 divided by 5. So let's put this in a real world context, okay? You have 1 whole pizza and 7 out of 8 slices of another pizza left. So 1 7/8 of some pizza that you have, and you're gonna split it, you're gonna divide it between 5 friends, right? This problem is basically you figuring out how much pizza each of your 5 friends is going to get. So let's figure out how much pizza that you guys would each get. Hopefully at this point, you can look back at the question before and you see that we're gonna need to do some popcorn here. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 7 is 15. So basically that tells us that we have 15 slices of pizza, right? 15 slices, and they're cut into eighths. Here's what gets a little bit tricky. This is a whole number. So just like we talked about yesterday, the way that we make a whole number into a fraction is to put a 1 under it, right? 5 divided by 1 would still be 5, okay? So I'm just gonna use a 1 to make a whole number into a fraction. Awesome. Okay, at this point though, let's talk through our steps again. So it says to divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second. So think to yourself, have we flipped this second fraction yet? No, we have not, right? So to flip this second fraction, it was 5 over 1. When I flip it, when I take the reciprocal, it's gonna be 1 over 5, right? So flip the second, it's 1 over 5, and multiply. Remember, every division problem with fractions turns into multiplication. Okay, let's do our multiplication then. To multiply fractions, you know you've got them, it's top times top. So 15 times 1 is 15, and bottom times bottom. 8 times 5 is 40. Awesome. And at this case, we don't have an improper fraction like we had here, so that's kind of a little bit easier. We do have 15 and 40, and both of those, they have a common factor. Think in your head, what is the common factor between 15 and 40? What can I divide both of those things by? If you struggle with that, I would encourage you to get out your multiplication chart and look at those things to see what you can divide both of them by. So 15 and 40, hopefully you recognized that you can divide those both by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3, and 40 divided by 5 is 8. And that's done. So let's talk about that real world scenario that we talked about. We had 1 7/8 of a pizza. We were dividing it by 5 people. So that means that each person would get 3 slices of pizza. That's not too bad of a deal, right? So next time you're at the pizza place and you need to figure out how much each person's taking home, you can do that. All right, let's do this next and last example on our paper. Next and last example. This one's gonna be a little bit more intricate because we're gonna start with 2 mixed numbers. So 2 2/3 divided by 1 1/4, okay? Again, the very first thing that we have to do, just like we did up here, is popcorn. Here's where people get confused. They try to do our popcorn step and our flipping step at the same time. I'm really gonna encourage you not to do that. We make little small errors, and once we do that, our whole problem is wrong. So we're gonna just do popcorn first, and then we're gonna flip. So I'm gonna put popcorn first. So 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So this is 8/3. It's still a division problem because I'm not flipping anything just yet. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 5/4. Notice I did not flip anything yet. All I did was change both of these mixed numbers into improper fractions. I'm gonna put step number 2 is gonna be to flip the second. Then we can complete our question, okay? So step number 2, 8/3 stays the same. 5 over 4 would flip. So that would be 4 over 5. So to divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. Awesome. And now again, we can kind of come back to that multiplication rhyme to multiply fractions. You know you've got them. It's top times top. So 8 times 4 is 32. And bottom times bottom, 3 times 5 is 15. Okay? So at this point, we know, again, we have this one has an improper fraction, which means the numerator is larger than the denominator. So we're gonna do some top in, bottom out, which is just division. And hopefully that you can see 15 goes into 32 2 whole times, because 2 times 15 is 30. When I subtract, there's 2 left over. So let's rewrite this as our final answer and see if we're finished. So 15 went into 32 2 whole times, with 2 as my remainder left over out of 15. At this point, 2/15, I can't simplify that at all, so that's my final answer there. All right, let's talk through our division rhyme, okay? And we'll put it all together with multiplication. To divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. To multiply fractions, you know you've got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. I would love for you guys to memorize those two. I promise if you do, it's gonna help you in your mathematical career through, I would say, high school and even college. I was in a college class and had to recite those, and it really helped me on a test as well. So good luck with your dividing fractions activity.